Zootopia, for the longest time, has been a Disney movie that I have liked, but not loved. And I've gone back to it multiple times over the years, and found that my opinion has largely stayed the same, since, while there are elements of the movie that I do truly love, I've also come to notice more flaws as well, and so those elements kind of just end up balancing each other out. But something has always told me deep down that this movie has some of the best potential that any Disney movie had ever had. I just know that it could have been a 10 out of 10 if just a few elements had been changed slightly or improved. And a deep dive into the behind the scenes of this movie has pretty much proven that point to me. In fact, not only could this movie have easily been a 10 out of 10, but it could have possibly even been the very best Walt Disney Animation Studios movie ever created. But first, let me analyze the Zootopia that was actually completed and released. The version of the film we can all watch today, because I need to lay out exactly what does and what doesn't work about the version of the movie we got, so that I can explain how the version of the movie we almost got could have been the superior one. I think the first and most obvious thing about Zootopia, as it is, that I and most everyone else likes, is of course Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde, and the great chemistry between these two characters. Judy Hopps is a pretty relatable character, especially to someone like me, who's put in a position in which they want to achieve a certain dream, but struggle to due to the circumstances of the world in which they were born in. Specifically, Judy here wanting to be a cop, but, being small and fluffy. And I love the fact that despite everyone telling her she can't achieve it, she goes and proves them wrong anyways, through genuine hard work and determination, showing that even if she's starting from a disadvantage, that doesn't necessarily mean it's impossible to achieve her dreams. She just has to put in more effort than most other people would. And I think that's a great, but still realistic angle to tackle this subject from, since I think it can be a little bit toxic to just tell people they can be whatever they want, no matter who they are or where they come from, because in a lot of cases that sadly isn't true, and people will eventually have to find out the hard way, this hard truth, if you know what I mean. However, that doesn't necessarily always mean that it is impossible to achieve these dreams. Some of them still can be reached. They just require more effort. Then we have Nick Wilde, who used to be the de facto main character of this movie before the scripts were changed a bit, but more on that later. The version of him that still exists in this final movie is quite an excellent character, though. I love how completely different his worldview is from Judy's, since they come from basically completely different regions with completely different ideas of how the world works. Not to mention being on opposite sides of the predator and prey spectrum, and the ways in which their worldviews continue to clash, often to comedic effect, make for some of the best interactions between two Disney characters ever put to screen. One thing I love about these two characters is how they're both written to be intelligent, and neither one is the butt of every joke, and they're always trying to get the better of each other, until they eventually start to bond by realizing that they actually like more aspects of each other than they dislike. And honestly, it's just one of the best developing relationships across any Disney movie. And I like that it isn't necessarily a romantic relationship, but even just as two best friends, it all comes off as really believable. Especially because, of course, they do have their problems with each other still. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. And speaking of things not all being sunshine and rainbows, that brings me to what is arguably this movie's greatest asset: its main themes, specifically that of discrimination. One thing that I really like about this movie is the fact that it uses animal characters to portray its theme of discrimination, since it allows the theme to be interpreted by the audience without automatically being applied to specific types of discrimination in real life against specific groups of people, which not only gives it a broader appeal, but sort of gives a bit of a safety cushion in case the writers or animators somehow accidentally end up not being as sensitive with the topic as they could be, since it is left up to interpretation a little bit due to the fact that they're animals. But for the most part, I think the movie pulls off the theme well. I'm not one of those people out there who somehow thinks that some of the animals being called predators has some sort of real-life connotation to it, that some groups of people are predators. Oh my goodness, how could Disney draw a line between those two things? Just watch the behind the scenes on this movie. That is clearly not the intent of the writers or directors or anyone involved in this movie. It's simply just the structure of the animal world, predators and prey. Now anyway, the greatest achievement of this theme, in my opinion though, is the fact that it explores the idea that it's not just one specific marginalized group that is discriminated against, but that discrimination can go multiple ways and can affect multiple people of all types, like how both Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde are the subject of discrimination from different groups of people, and for different reasons. Since I'm kind of tired of stories that just sort of say one group is the bad guys and the other group are the good guys who are being attacked by the bad guys, which is rarely ever the truth, because fact of the matter is, real life isn't just black and white. I really love how Judy's parents come into the equation of the theme of this movie too, since it shows us where Judy gets some of her preconceived biases about people from, those being her parents, who grew up fearing foxes specifically, to genuine irrational levels. And it shows that not all people who may have come to have acquired these biases or stereotypical ideas of other people came to those ideas on their own and simply had them passed down to them by their parents or grandparents, who were the ones who actually came up with these ideas in the first place for whatever reason. But all the fear-mongering talk that her parents have said over the years has caused Judy to think in the back of her mind that they might be right, even though she may have never come to that conclusion on her own. And I love how the movie, throughout its runtime, toys with the biases that Judy has, and the ways in which she struggles not entirely knowing if they are true or not, such as during the ice cream shop scene, in which Nick Wilde is pulling off his big con, and how she at first thinks to use her fox spray against him because he might be some sort of shifty individual, only to then change her mind and try to prove herself wrong because deep down she doesn't want to believe what her parents said is true, only to once again alter her mindset when it does turn out that Nick Wilde was doing something a little bit shifty, which then makes her question whether or not her first instinct was actually right or not, because it did turn out that Nick Wilde was a bit of a shifty individual. But does that necessarily correlate to the fact that he's a fox? And all of this works so well because of the fact that you could find situations like this in real life all the time, in which there is sort of anecdotal evidence that quote-unquote certain groups of people are worse than others. But the problem is, people's first assumptions in these cases are usually the wrong conclusion. And most of the reason it may seem like some group is worse than some other group is because of complicated factors, usually having more to do with society and generational wealth and other factors, than what it has to do with what a person looks like or where they come from, which, in theory, should be completely irrelevant details. And sadly, a lot of innocent people end up suffering due to the biases that exist within people that come from anecdotal evidence, rather than definitive proof, because there is no definitive proof that anyone is lesser than anyone else, obviously. One very small and subtle scene that I actually quite like a lot comes after Judy and Nick are reunited before the finale of the film, and Nick hops inside Judy's car, in which she has a basket of vegetables, and is surprised to find that there's not just carrots there, but other vegetables, showing how it's not just Judy who has preconceived stereotypes of what other people are like, but Nick as well. And how, even in small ways that seem insignificant, these things can stack up and matter. But my favorite scene in this movie regarding the theme has to be the scene where Judy is answering the questions of the press, and Nick Wilde overhears the entire thing. What I love so much about this scene is that it reveals multiple things to us about Judy's character. The first of which being that it changes how we perceive Nick and Judy's relationship up to this point in the movie. Since during this scene, Judy accidentally but clearly makes it out to be that she has thought of Nick as being an exception to the rule, rather than proving that foxes aren't like what she thought they were, that he's simply just different from the rest. which is a very dangerous and toxic mindset to have, because it implies the idea that each and every fox, and any equivalent interpreted people group in real life, would have to independently prove themselves to be of worth and value when they shouldn't have to in the first place. I mean, it's like if everyone was in a race, but then one guy on the far side of the race started inside a giant pit and had to climb out of the pit first before he could start running down the racetrack. It's a clear disadvantage that is completely unfair. And Nick Wilde is like the guy in the pit here. He has to prove himself first before he's given the same equal opportunity and chance in life that everyone else is given by default. And it shouldn't have to be that way for everyone who's like him, because that's the way they're born. They have no control over that. And on top of that, there's the second reason, the fact that Judy doesn't realize what she's doing here. She doesn't realize how awful she sounds, because she genuinely does not understand this perspective that Nick has. I love this because it shows us that a lot of people who may seem like bad people or say things that we think are bad may not even realize what they're doing. And it's not because they're bad people, but because they're led to believe things that they genuinely think are true, even though they don't actually mean to do or say anything bad. And it's just another unfortunate side effect of stereotypes and discrimination. That people who are ignorant or blinded to the truth for whatever reason are made into lesser versions of themselves than they would be otherwise. And a lot of it can come down to trying to fit in and just do and say what everyone else seems to be doing or saying. And even when people are like Judy and they want to be better than the rest of the world, they want to give people like Nick Wilde a chance, they could still end up struggling to do and say the right things. Because once those wrong ideas are cemented in their heads, it's hard to get them out, even when you know they're not true. And I also love how the conclusion of this scene makes Judy realize that what she's doing here, what she didn't realize she was doing there, goes against the very reason she wanted to be a police officer in the first place, to stand up for the misfortunate and oppressed. And now it feels like all she's done is help to make the misfortunate and oppressed even more misfortunate and oppressed. And the last great angle of the theme of this movie comes in the form of Judy's parents and the childhood bully eventually coming to terms with each other and realizing the errors of their ways. And just like how I love the fact that the discrimination in this movie is not entirely one-sided, I love this scene because it shows that both sides were flawed in their perspectives, but that both sides can also still change to become better people, and that no one is truly lost forever. With enough thought and effort, any broken relationship or flawed perspective can be repaired, but sometimes it will only work if both sides are willing to cooperate and see the problems from a nuanced perspective. Well, I guess that brings me to the end of the positive critiques for this movie, which still represents most of the movie. Well, I suppose I could also bring up the comedy. The DMV scene is pretty legendary, I will admit. Not quite as keen on the Naturalist Club scene, but it still does have its moments. The Godfather reference, of course, another good scene. Well, except, of course, the convenient escaping from the problem. And, oh, what do you know? That leads me to the beginning of my critiques. Actually, let me start with the theme, since that's kind of what I was just talking about. As good as most of the thematic elements are in this movie, they don't all work perfectly. And the biggest problem that I do have is this movie's over-reliance on putting the blame on individuals. And that isn't to say that individuals are not to blame in some cases, a lot of cases, but choosing to discriminate against someone isn't always just a deliberate choice. As I made clear, I like the fact that Judy's discriminatory ideas were passed down to her from her parents, but that's pretty much the only exception to the rest of the movie. Pretty much every other character we see in the movie who chooses to discriminate at any point is an individual who is shown to not like someone else for whatever unexplained reason. Just basic fear or whatever, or being mean because they think they're better. And like I said, these can be factors in discrimination in real life, but I just wish that the movie put more focus on the idea that that society has conformed people often into believing these things are true. And the reason that a lot of people are afraid in the first place, or choose to think of themselves as being better, is because someone important or the news told them so. And it's specifically disappointing to me because of, well, the stuff that could have almost been in the movie. A perfect example of what I'm trying to say about the fact that this movie mostly puts the blame on individuals comes in the form of Nick's backstory. The fact that he was bullied by a bunch of other kids for being a predator. And it kind of just comes off like they're bullying him over the fact that he's a predator because they're mean. Due to the fact that they're children, they don't exactly have firmly rooted beliefs built in them just quite yet. And even though they say they don't trust a predator, implying there's some sort of fear here, that doesn't really come out in their voices. It's mostly spite. And while this scene is supposed to exist to build sympathy for Nick, I don't think it works that well as just a scene on its own. Nick's backstory in the original version of this movie was much better in my opinion. Don't worry, we'll get to that soon enough. And also I think this movie's idea of this sort of idealized society that has flaws isn't as well executed as it could have and should have been, since the movie essentially portrays it as Zootopia is a perfect place, except for that one mean sheep who's manipulating people so that she can get power. Oh, but once she's gone, everything is perfect. And generally, we don't see enough negativity throughout the movie from most people. Since if the people in this city are really on such an edge that they can be pushed over to believe the fact that all the predators are so dangerous, then why do they not act that way for the majority of the movie? Pretty much only these elephant guys are ever mean. And honestly, it comes off more so that they're mean because Nick is too small more than it is that specifically he's a fox. It sort of portrays this idea that anyone could just flip on a dime if they believe what society tells them, which kind of has this very low faith in humanity kind of vibes to it. And sure, while I do wish that there were more of a sort of overall society corruption thing going on, usually that has to do with firmly held beliefs that have been constantly pushed onto people throughout their lives, where to them it would feel weird if that wasn't the truth and they wouldn't know what to think anymore, and that's why they do and say bad things. Not just that they would do and say bad things because they're suddenly manipulated within the span of a couple days to believe that something is true. Although I do like that they include the scene with Gazelle and her friends, showing that they do still have some belief, so it's not completely without nuance. Maybe I'm just being overly nitpicky. Like, if these were the only flaws with the theme, I could probably let them slide, even though the themes in the earlier version of the story were even better and didn't have these same flaws. However, there are a couple other aspects to this movie which are the main reason it's not a masterpiece. And that has to do with the actual crime investigation that's going on. Something I haven't really talked about much up to this point. While it is a pretty engaging investigation, it runs almost completely on sheer coincidence power. I mean, first of all, it's a coincidence that Judy happens to run into Nick in the first place, because if she didn't, she would never even come close to finding him in Honorton, since her only clue has to do with running into Nick, discovering he's a con man, and following him to find out that he made the same popsicles that Emmett Otterton happened to purchase in the past. And it's also a coincidence that the only reason Judy and Nick are able to escape Mr. Big because of the fact that Judy happened to coincidentally save his daughter in one random incident, or else they would have totally been screwed here. It's also a pretty big coincidence that this Panther guy gives them the clue of night howlers, and that Nick happens to come up with an idea that leads them directly to all the people who went missing, even though that wasn't even the clue the guy was trying to say in the first place. And it's a pretty big coincidence that there happened to be a way to escape from their locked-in jail cell right before they're caught in this situation. And do I even need to mention the coincidence? You know, the coincidence to end all coincidences is the fact that the true hint that this guy telling them about night howlers meant was some random flowers that happen to be growing right outside where Judy decides to move to with her family to work, and they happen to know exactly what these flowers are, and they are in fact the exact flowers that the villain is using. And if none of these things happened to coincide, Judy would have never realized the truth and never would have gone back to Nick and never would have solved the problem. Like, there are still moments where there's genuine plot progression in this case that doesn't rely on coincidence, but I'm pretty certain at least half of the stuff that happens is coincidence. Oh, and can I just mention this one scene here where the police chief gets mad at Judy for seemingly leading them to a dead end, and then he tries to call off her case and make her resign right then and there. I do like the fact that Nick steps in and says their time hasn't actually run out and allows them to continue on their journey. But I'll tell you what I don't like. I don't like the fact that Judy says nothing about the wallet of Emmett Otterton that they found previously. I mean, that's far more progress and evidence than anyone else has made on this case up to that point. Doesn't that prove that clearly what she's saying has some merit to it, and she should in fact be given the ability to finish the case without Nick even having to step in here? I don't know, that just really bothered me for some reason. Oh yeah, and then there's the sheep, one of Disney's amazing twist villains. And the funniest thing is that the way she's written into the plot isn't necessarily the biggest problem. Like, her plan mostly makes sense. And I love that she basically ends up turning herself in. The reason she doesn't work, though, is because she's barely even a character in the movie at all. It's so clear to me that the writers wanted the twist that she was the true villain behind everything to be a surprise, that they were genuinely afraid of putting her in more scenes because it would be too obvious. So in order to make the twist some shocking revelation, they basically had to reduce her presence in the movie to almost nothing so that you'd never be thinking about her. And sure, while this does make the twist more surprising, it doesn't work because we fail to care about her as a character in the first place before the twist happens. And so essentially the twist becomes meaningless because we don't care enough for the shock value to hold any meaning. And so that is the mostly good but still somewhat flawed movie that Zootopia is. But it could have been so much more. The original version of Zootopia, before some major story changes happened, featured, as I mentioned before, Nick Wilde as the main character of the movie, with Judy being more of the most important side character who tags along with him for quite a while. And these two characters were originally used to show two completely different perspectives on the world of Zootopia itself. And you may think, isn't that exactly what they do in the final movie? Well, yes, to a certain extent, but not in the same way that it applied to the original story. You see, there's one major key difference between the original version of Zootopia and the version we finally got: the taming collars. This major plot point in the original version made it so that the only reason predators and prey lived in peace in Zootopia was not because they had gotten over their differences and changed their ways, but rather that prey believed the only way they could live in harmony with predators was essentially if they had control over them and prevented them from being able to access their primal instincts. And if they ever did even come close to that, the collars would shock them. This one difference almost completely alters the entire perception of how we see the city of Zootopia and the society here at large, because it changes it from this utopian world where everything is perfect except for a couple of bad apples who refuse to get with the times, to a world in which the problems are created by a society who genuinely does not have enough faith in, well, it's not exactly humanity, but zoology? You know what I mean. To actually let people be who they are. At least some people, that is. The predators in particular. And of course, as we all know, Nick Wilde is one of them. And so, he has a collar in this version of the story. And because of this, he's essentially already labeled to everyone who even sees him at a glance. He lives in a world with a complete atmosphere of fear throughout the entire place. Despite being a good person at heart and wanting to do good things, people automatically label him as being bad just because of who they perceive him as and what they've been led to believe by the society around them. And because of this, Nick is not offered the same opportunities as other people. And I think this adds a lot more depth to his character, which is unfortunately missing in the final version of the movie. And all of this stuff revolving around the collars adds a completely new meaning to the slogan of Zootopia itself, that anyone can be anything, making it, instead of being this semi-true statement, into an idea that reflects how society often tells us things that sound super positive, but they rarely ever back up the things they say. People will tell you all the time when you're a kid that you can be anything you want to be, but will they help you actually achieve your dream to be that thing? Fat chance. More likely they'll do everything in their power to stop you from achieving that dream. There's this fantastic deleted scene in which Nick wants to help out other predators who aren't allowed to be themselves anymore because of the fact that the taming collars basically force them to be completely docile all the time and hold back their true selves. So he comes up with an idea to fund a special place where they can let out who they are in a safe environment so no one has to be afraid. And this would be the perfect way for him to earn money. The problem is, his idea is too expensive to create in the first place. And most places simply won't hire him or pay him because he's a predator. And when he tries to get a loan from the bank to build this place, they won't give him a loan either.
There's just too much risk in loaning to mammals without credit.
Well, see, the thing is, I can't get credit if you won't loan to me.
Right. Absolutely, and we will be happy to loan to you when you do have the credit.
This version of Nick Wilde I find to be even more relatable than the one in the final movie, because it shows us exactly why he's a con man. Because he's not even been given the opportunity by society itself to be what he actually wants to be, to do the things he wants to do, because of the position in which he was born in, something he has absolutely no control over. Oftentimes, I too find myself in a similar position, not that I've ever been a con man, but that I have had dreams of things I want to do, but because I was born into a poor family, I simply do not have the money in the first place to be able to get that job and thus be able to earn money back. Like, what I actually wanted to do with my life is become a film director. But you have to already have enough money to be able to move to Los Angeles to actually be able to get in that position in the first place. Meanwhile, if you're born rich or born into a family that's already a part of Hollywood, you basically get a free ticket in without having to do any effort. Meanwhile, me over here, I have to do 10 times the effort to even have a chance of being accepted in the first place. And another fantastic scene, which sadly didn't make it to the final version due to the removal of the collars, was a scene in which a polar bear father is having a quote-unquote celebration for his son becoming old enough to be a man, or, well, a big bear, and be given his taming collar for the first time. And this is honestly one of the saddest scenes that anyone has ever come up with for a Disney movie, because we can see how innocent and unaware this polar bear child is of what all this actually means, because he's been led to believe that Zootopia is this perfect place, and that getting this collar finally means you get to really be a part of it and join in with everyone else. But the truth of the matter is that Zootopia is not a perfect world or an accepting world whatsoever. And I find it absolutely chilling when the father is having his son recite the little acceptance speech of sorts. And at one point he says,
"With this collar, Zootopia welcomes you.
With this collar, Zootopia welcomes me.
With this collar, Zootopia celebrates you.
With this collar, Zootopia celebrates me.
With this collar, Zootopia accepts you."
And this is just one of those moments that's just so disturbing, but, in the right kind of way. Because if Zootopia actually celebrated these people, then why would they try to control them and keep them in line? They don't believe in the equality of these people. They only believe that through their submission can they truly be accepted. And I love the way in which Judy watches this whole scene play out, completely unaware to the sad reality of everything. She knows what a taming party is, but she's never been to one because she's not a part of that circle. She doesn't know what it really means, and it's to the benefit of her society to keep her in the dark so that she doesn't understand these things, because it allows them to manipulate her into accepting ways that are wrong. The less people know and understand something, the easier they are to control. And so we can see through this viewpoint that it's not just the predators who are being controlled, but prey who are genuinely good people and would want to do the right thing and let the predators be free, but are deliberately tricked into not knowing what is happening all around them so that they can't do anything about it. This much darker and more cynical version of Zootopia, I think in a lot of ways, sadly, reflects the real world more so. Because the truth of the matter is, even if there are good people out there, the ones in control, the ones who have the most influence over the world, are the ones who decide what is right and wrong, whether or not it actually is right and wrong. And they hold all the power, and if they don't want you to have any power, then they will find ways to prevent you from getting any. But apparently, Disney was too cowardly. According to the behind the scenes, the directors claimed this movie was just too miserable or whatever. But I don't necessarily think that's true, because there's so much richness to the depth here. And in a lot of ways, Pinocchio could be considered a miserable movie with everything he has to go through, and that's the best movie Disney's ever made. I happen to think that the truth of the matter happens to be more along the lines of Disney just being too afraid of creating a movie with darker themes like this, especially the kind of themes that kind of subtly call out their bullcrap. And so they had the directors pivot the course of the movie into a more lighter, family-friendly kind of movie, and in the process kind of created a lot of the problems that the movie now currently has, such as the themes not being quite as well portrayed as they could be, and some of the most egregious coincidences in the plot, such as that flower scene, wouldn't even need to exist because there would be no poisonous, savage flower fumes being shot at predators, because that role would be taken simply by the idea of a predator not having a collar on or something like that. Most likely, anyway. I don't know. Not all the details of the original version of this story have been fully released to my knowledge. But from what I know, Zootopia genuinely had the potential to be even greater than it was. To even rival something like Pinocchio. But I suppose I should still be grateful that the movie we did end up getting was still pretty good for the most part. I mean, it could have been worse, just saying. Oh, and of course, I can't forget to thank all my lovely Patreon subscribers and channel members too, who support me in an extra way. I give you all an iconic salute. Hey, if you want to sign up, by the way, there's a link in the description down below. I am also on several social media platforms, and I have a gaming channel too if you're interested in any of that. Also, links in the description down below. Well, if you enjoyed this video, a like would be nice, but also, perhaps you'd enjoy watching another one of my Walt Disney Animation Studios reviews. I have a bunch in this playlist over here, or if perhaps you're more interested in the Pixar side of Disney's library of films, then don't worry, I've also got you covered with this playlist up here. You know, either way, I'm sure you'll find a video you're interested in, but most importantly of all, always remember to be
Hello, this is Flurry Moon. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing something a little different, but I hope you'll stick around because, guys, this is going to be a wild video. Today we will be taking a deep dive into the app Episode. Chances are, if you're here, you may have heard of Episode, or maybe you've played it when you were like 14 for like a week and then forgot all about it. Maybe you still play the game to this day like I do. But if you don't know anything about the app, Episode is a mobile game by Pocket Gems released on July 11th, 2013. The app is structured so there are thousands of stories to choose from, where you usually play as the main character and customize your name, facial features, hair, clothes, etc. In these stories, you make choices in each chapter that will determine how the game plays out. This includes getting different endings, choosing your favorite love interest, and just how the characters act towards you in general. Other stories don't include any choices, so playing it is more like reading a visual novel where you do not have power over anything that happens in the story. The app is still around today, the last decade being filled with millions of authors and readers flooding the app for creative escape. But how deep does it get? We will be going over the episode Iceberg made by me with the help of the r/episode subreddit. You guys are the best. If you don't know, an iceberg is basically just a deep dive on a topic that is structured from most well-known facts to most obscure. The deeper you go, the more weird, unknown, and sometimes dark parts of the topic come to light. With that, let's begin the episode Iceberg. Before anything, I just want to say I'm definitely missing a ton of stuff, so feel free to comment below things I missed, or if you'd like a part 2, I'd totally do it. So let's start with the tip of the iceberg, gem choices. We're starting off the tip of the iceberg with something you've probably heard of even if you have never even downloaded the game, and that is gem choices. I feel like everyone online has seen those memes of an episode character having to pay 30 gems to wear a gown to their wedding, while the free option is like, wear jeans and a t-shirt. Honestly, the free option these days would be like, break off the engagement and spit in his face. Also, you heard me right, the free option. Gems cost actual real-life money to get. So if you're broke, most of the time you can't pick any of the fun options like, accept the prince's kindness and take his jacket, heart, or rudely turn him down. Do you want to get a paternity test, Faye? Yes, I want to know if this baby is ours for 19 gems, or I'm fine with not knowing. Also, I would love to know the context of this story because what? I want to give the right first impression. I should kindly insist everyone go have dinner. Have Marcellus join me for dinner. Or have them stand around watching me eat until I'm done. Can you guess what the free option was? I have nothing to hide. I will hold my head high and prove my innocence. Prove my innocence and blow them away with the truth for 19 gems, or be sneaky and lie, raising their suspicions. That last one is actually so insane. As you can guess, gem choices completely take you out of the story, and honestly, it makes the game almost unplayable at times, but not every story has them, which brings us to episode originals versus community stories. You guys, I just realized throughout this entire video, I say episode originals. I know some people do call it that, but they're called episode officials. Like, they are called episode officials, so I don't know why. I don't know why I said episode original throughout this whole video. It shouldn't really make that much of a difference, but that's what I meant. I don't know, you guys. Stories on the app are split into 2 different categories, episode originals and community stories. Originals are stories either bought by episode and tweaked to fit their standards, or created by episode themselves from scratch. These stories are usually condensed into about 8 chapters, naturally making them feel rushed or lazy, and are jam-packed with gem choices. Community stories, on the other hand, are made by independent writers who usually make money, if at all, based on how many reads they get. These tend to be much more well thought out, carefully directed, and are way less restricted by gem choices or needing to fit all the content into a small number of chapters. Like I said before, episode can buy a community story and make it into an episode original if they successfully buy it from the writer. A lot of the time you can find the original story and the episode official story on the author's page. Either way, community stories are much preferred within the fan base, and I cannot blame them. Episode ads. Back in like 2016, Episode would have these ads on social media to get people to download the app. They would be in the form of a scenario with choices to show that the game is choose your own adventure. These wouldn't be actual screenshots from a real story in the game. They were made solely for advertising. The one I remember seeing all the time and is my personal favorite, wait, it's Aaron, not Erin? Fine, I plan the next one, or run for the hills. Fine, I plan the next one. Don't look, it's bad luck. Buy a new dress, or cancel wedding. Ugh, you make me crazy. Smash the vase, or take it to the bedroom. These ads designed to strike attention sure did when they started going viral on Tumblr and people started making their own. I can't believe you ate all my fucking Takis. Start World War III, or A squared plus B squared equals C squared. It's not what it looks like. Why did you sleep with my girlfriend, Chad? Or why is she still wearing a bra when there's one on the lamp? Looks like Bae is in the shower. Lock him in the bathroom and set the house on fire? Or start World War III with your large arsenal of military weapons? People really love to make their episode characters start World War III, I guess. Needless to say, this brought a lot of people to download the app out of curiosity or for laughs. Classic, Inc., Limelight. Throughout the years, Episode has had 3 different art styles, beginning with Classic, the original and only art style from the app's launch in 2013 to 2016. The style of characters is a little awkward and clunky in my opinion, but I wasn't on the app during this time, so maybe I just don't get it, you know? Some of the girl avatar designs are actually really cute, and the outfits are some of the best I've seen of all 3 art styles. The guy avatars, however, are actually so scary and uncanny looking. I genuinely cannot look at them for too long. They all have this weird jawline and look like they're constantly grossed out by something. I just cannot get behind it. Ink was introduced in late 2015 with the Demi Lovato Path to Fame story. More on that later. Ink then became available to everyone in 2016. Maybe it's because I joined the app during this era, but Ink is by far my favorite style out of the 3. The facial expressions and movements are so animated, the guys aren't that ugly, and I just love how cartoony it is, in that it wasn't trying too hard to look hyper realistic. This art style brought some of the most iconic stories and memes to come out of episodes, so I have such a soft spot for the Ink era. Which brings us to our final and current art style, Limelight. Limelight became available to everyone in 2017, and it was quite the change. Limelight is a lot more realistic looking than the previous art styles, and it led to more diversity, such as plus-size avatars and way more inclusive hairstyles, which is great. Limelight is objectively the, quote, best of the 3, but it really comes down to what you prefer and usually nostalgia. What is your favorite style? Demi Lovato, the Dolan twins, Mean Girls, etc. There was an era where Episode would collaborate with different companies and create these stories that involved celebrities, movies, TV shows, and even influencers, ? The first of these was the Demi Lovato story I mentioned earlier. There were actually 3 seasons, each walking you through your character's, quote, path to fame after meeting Demi Lovato herself. I loved this story. I so vividly remember playing it. I played it in high school. I should have been dating. I should have been going to parties. I was playing this in high school. Episode then collaborated with Mean Girls, this time separating the seasons into different stories. The first one being Mean Girls senior year, taking place the year after the 2004 movie. Then Mean Girls Sorority Rush, where you and the iconic characters take on college. And lastly, Mean Girls Spring Break. The Mean Girls trilogy was particularly interesting because the art style was a mix between Ink and this weird pre-Limelight style to make the characters look as close to the movie as possible. But in my opinion, it's really odd for your character to be in regular Episode Ink style, but you're standing next to this. Next up is Pretty Little Liars, a spin-off game of the TV show where your character joins the 4 main characters to solve what happened to their missing friend Allison. And of course, there was a sequel called Pretty Little Liars to Die For. We will also talk about the very specific art style in the PLL stories later in the iceberg. Next up, this one makes me laugh. Next up is Cameron Dallas Started With a Lie. I can't stop laughing already. If you don't remember, Cameron Dallas was a Viner/YouTuber back in the day and is the first influencer to collaborate with Episode, I think. I was actually shocked reading the description of this story because I expected it to be something like, quote, you meet your favorite YouTuber at a party. What will you do when he has his eyes set on you? Or something super basic like that. But here is what Episode Wiki tells you about this story, okay? Plot. You are questioned about a murder, and you tell the whole story, starting how you met Cameron Dallas with a lie, about you dating him to make Karen jealous because she dated your crush, Peter. Cameron tracks his phone and arrives with his car, which causes hitting Victor. As you told the whole story to the detective, he releases Cameron Dallas from jail. What? First of all, I had a stroke trying to understand that. Second of all, I need to read this, and I wish I could. Third of all, who the hell is Victor? There are also a few more, including Falling for the Dolan Twins, Pitch Perfect in Deep Treble, and Hollywood Days with Hayes, including Hayes Greer, which I have no recollection of this story. Does anyone remember this? The only stories out of all the collaborations that are still up and playable on the app are the Pretty Little Liars stories. I'm assuming the licensing for the rest of them expired and Episode didn't bother to renew them or there were copyright issues. Next tier. We are now entering the next tier of the iceberg, meaning we've gotten through most of the well-known stuff, and now we're going to get a little deeper. Starting with iconic community stories. These stories are written by independent authors that absolutely changed the game and the trajectory of how the app has grown into what it is today. That was kind of hard to say. These are not just really well done stories. Some of them are actually not even that great looking back, but they paved the way, and I gotta respect that. First and foremost, one of the most read stories on the app with over 86 million reads. Chain Reaction by Miss MJ. This story had a chokehold on me back in the day. You play as Callie, who, after witnessing a gang murder, is forced to join the Bronze Dragons and falls in love with the sexy leader and her captor, Trey Bailey. I don't like blonde men, so I'm good. This story really set the stage for what the app will become, and that is absolutely stacked with mafia stories. More on that later. It became so popular and well-loved that the author teamed up with Episode to make the next 2 books in the series Episode Originals. This made a lot of people upset at the time because, of course, you had to pay gems to make the choices you, actually want to make. That didn't stop these entries from being extremely successful along with the original. Nowadays, the series is mostly seen as extremely toxic and overdone. It basically glamorizes Stockholm Syndrome, and Trey is honestly really creepy. I think most of us were pretty young reading that and probably shouldn't have been reading that. Trigger warning for this next one, we will briefly be talking about emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I know, this is a kid's app. Up next is the first community story I ever read, and that is Blake. It is centered around the main character, Blake, a high school girl who has been abused by her mother, Kate, her whole life. Her mother hates her because she got pregnant with Blake in high school, causing her parents to kick her out. She never gave up Blake because she has this weird logic that having her daughter ruined her life, so she does everything she can to ruin Blake's life and make her miserable. You guys, I don't know. A stepdad comes into the picture and begins abusing her. This story is so dark. That's when Liam, a gang member that looks literally 54 years old but is in high school, swoops in to save Blake from her living nightmare. This story has 17.1 million reads and is followed by a sequel surrounding Blake and Liam's daughter, Grace, which has 4.1 million reads. This may not seem as popular as Chain Reaction, but it really was iconic and brought a lot of serious topics to the app. Now, if it was done correctly, that's up for debate. Let's speedrun a few more iconic community stories because we have lots to get to. The Shaw Brothers, Complicated, Faking Death, Galactic Game, The Teacher, Dripping Mascara, The New Girl, The Doberman. I forgot to add this, but what's my favorite right now? Bad Influence. So good. And so much more that we may get to later in the iceberg. Though sometimes controversial, you have to give these authors some credit for creating something so monumental from scratch with lots of coding involved, all on their own. Mafia stories. Sooner or later, we'd have to talk in depth about the insane amount of mafia-themed stories on this app. As mentioned earlier, one of, if not the first mafia story on Episode was Chain Reaction. And boy, did it cause just that. Get it? After this story blew up, it seems that almost every story occupying the drama section involves a, quote, notorious gang leader that captures the helpless, innocent, with a heart of gold main character that makes his ice-cold heart melt, causing him to care about another human for the very first time in his life. Give or take a few details like the main character holding her own and having some sass, which for some reason doesn't get her killed, but this trope has been severely overdone. Although the most popular genre on the app amongst casual readers, most of the community sees mafia stories as a joke, and there are tons of memes like the height difference often used in these stories, the excessive tattoos and scars the love interests have, and of course the obvious romanticizing of toxic abusive relationships shouldn't have as much appeal as it does. I guess some of the storylines are mildly interesting, especially to younger readers, which is concerning to say the least. Okay, moving on. Ink to Limelight drama. As someone who witnessed this in real time, it was a bit wild. As we know, ink was the mainly used style on Episode from late 2015 to mid 2017 when Limelight was debuted. I can't speak for everyone, but I was not happy. It was a big change from the cartoony style of ink that had so much character and expressive animations to what felt like at the time smooth-looking, soulless characters that almost gave Uncanny Valley vibes. Nowadays, I'm used to Limelight and I do like it a lot, but at the time, a lot of people were really unhappy unhappy. I remember reading the Hunting Bad series by Hope Moon. Does anyone remember this? And when she announced the next entry in the series would be exclusively in Limelight, people were up in arms in the comments saying they will not be reading. It wasn't the author's fault. Limelight was new and being updated constantly, so it was the obvious choice. But seeing the beloved characters go from this to this, it was hard for people. It's true that even to this day, you can read and create stories using ink, but only Limelight is used in official stories and ink will never get an update again. So naturally, ink has kind of been left in the dust by authors and readers. It starts with a bra. You guys knew this shit was coming. You knew it. It Starts With a Bra is an episode original that was published in May of 2018. This story was controversial and had an episode receiving quite a lot of backlash from the community. The story begins with your main character moving to a new town where you find your next door neighbor is a hot, bad boy. Pretty basic sounding, right? That is until he breaks into your house, sneaks into your bedroom, and steals your bra just to hang it on the flagpole at school? Huh? Yes, this is the main love interest. This begins some kind of prank war between the main character and the bad boy, Alec. There was also another love interest, Dylan, but it's clear the story wants you to pick Alec so bad. If you need a visual of this, the YouTuber Gen X Pen, love her, made a series playing this story, and every time she spent gems, actual money, to not spend time with the creep Alec, it always brought her back to him anyway. People were livid about this story because once again, it promotes toxic and predatory behavior and the actual story is just a mess. Like, the story sucks. Here's a post from the episode's subreddit back in 2020. First off, what the fuck? What kind of love interest would steal someone's bra and people would think that's cute? No, this is not cute and romantic. This is literally a crime because you stole someone's private property and it was trespassing. No, Alec, I don't care whether you help main character or not. You are a piece of shit. And no, don't go into main character's room when she said to leave her alone. Man, you really don't know what personal space is, do you? And when you blame yourself for main character almost drowning herself, the fuck is this? I was thrilled because you are trash. Alec, when you kiss Tiana and then just acts like a jerk to main character, you are the worst love interest I had ever met. Needless to say, most of the episode originals nowadays are exactly like this. I feel like before It Starts With a Bra, the episode originals still had some depth and good storylines, kind of, but now they're just so beyond lazy. If you don't believe me, read Don't Tell Daddy. Nowadays, you can only make your own episode story on a computer using code directing. This is extremely time-consuming and honestly requires talent and a good amount of trial and error. But there was a time on the app where making stories was a lot easier and more accessible. Mobile Creator was brought to episode in 2016. This allowed users to write, direct, and eventually publish their own stories using their smartphone. It was a more simple and basic way of making your stories with no coding required. You would simply move the character where you wanted it to stand, type the dialogue, and that was pretty much it. Of course, your options were extremely limited when it came to clothing and animations, and there was no advanced directing whatsoever, so your characters would be super glitchy most of the time. I used the Mobile Creator a lot back in the day, and I actually still have a story up published to this day that I made back in 2017 called Copycat. I could honestly make a whole series reacting to this shit show of a story, so comment below if you'd like to see it. Mobile Creator did lead to some wild stories being published though, since it didn't require a whole lot of effort to make. However, it was too much effort than it was worth to keep, so Episode announced the Mobile Creator's departure in July of 2019. I remember going onto the app and seeing that they took it down, and I was crushed. Maybe one day it'll make a comeback, but it's unlikely. Rest in peace, mobile stories. Next tier, we are now entering the second to lowest tier of the iceberg, so we're really getting into the stuff that you would only know if you've been in the community for quite some time. Controversial author drama. As much as I make fun of bad stories, I still have a lot of respect for those who put themselves out there and publish their own content for the world to judge. With that being said, that does not make anyone exempt from criticism. I would say one of the most controversial authors on the app currently is Helly. Heli? I don't know, you guys. Before getting into why people don't like her, I wanted to point out that there are many rumors that she's racist, but I myself found zero proof of this, so I'll be ignoring that claim unless someone out there has any proof. Heli is one of the biggest authors on the app, with almost every one of her stories having reads in the millions. She currently has 3 episode original stories and 4 community stories, all occupying the top of the romance genre list. So that means the stories are pretty great. Right? I'll start this section by saying I myself have never read any of these stories in full. I've started pretty much all of them, but they never clicked for me personally. But tons of readers in the community have a lot to say, especially about her choices in writing love interests. It seems as though in most of her stories, the love interest is super toxic, abusive, and honestly just a bully to the main character. I've seen some screenshots of her episode original, Deal with the Devil, and the description is, you're the school's golden girl pretending to be rich when in reality, you're poor. The school director's son finds out about your secret and threatens to expose you. Okay, sounds pretty basic. I feel like I've seen this anime before, but whatever. He takes a picture of the main character at her job and blackmails her into being his pet. Yeah, my pet is not allowed to teach anybody without my consent. Is this how you should treat your owner?
I can throw whatever I want to throw. I can do whatever I want to do. Or you can do nothing but accept it.
Huh? Honestly, I hate to be that person who takes things too seriously,